We may have followed some of the mainstream guides and ended up with a build that plays out basically like this. 2 buttons, pretty much. Rake, disengage, and you move. And then you realize maybe that's not what I want to be playing for a month, just jumping back and forth and just like yo-yo gameplay basically. And you're right, you probably shouldn't, because it's just not good. It doesn't even scale that well, unfortunately. But there are ways to make bleed actually legit, and I'm gonna show you one of them, and I hope you enjoy it. Also, at the time of making this video, they just released a patch where bleed can now be applied through energy shield, which is an amazing buff for this build. Alright, so our main skill is Twister, which you get at level 1, believe it or not. So what is nice about this skill? First of all, it has higher attack damage than Rake. Second, it can be scaled quite a bit if you consume whirlwinds. And there's 2 ways to generate whirlwinds. One is through Whirlwind Slash, which gives you up to 3 stages. And the other one is through Whirlwind Lance. So essentially, you could play this build from level 1. I've seen some other people use Whirlwind Slash. I would say it's easier to set up, but Whirlwind Lance has the higher ceiling easily, and it's also faster. So that's why this is my skill of choice. It's good because it can consume a frenzy charge to gain an extra stage, meaning that you deal even more damage with your twisters. So how does it work? Well, you have twisters flying out on your left click, and on the right click you have Whirlwind Lance, which has Salvo, which is very similar to Unleash if you're familiar with the caster builds. And you throw out a bunch of these whirlwinds, then you just voila, you have very strong, very many twisters flying around. You can also stack the whirlwinds to increase their stage manually, but this works really well with frenzy charges because the frenzy charge is going to give you more stages, meaning bigger whirlwinds, meaning bigger twisters and more twisters. And it's just, the whole screen just explodes. But how do you even get consistent bleeding and consistent damage with a twister? Well, we're using Lacerate, which is 50% chance to inflict bleeding, which is not enough to be consistent. So on the tree, we're getting as much bleed and ailment infliction as possible. Also, especially at lower levels, it would be cool to use Incision, something that applies Incision. So a support gem on our support skill, Spearfield, which will inflict stacks of Incision. And what this does is it gives you more chance to apply bleed on an enemy when hit. But the problem is that all the debuff stacks get removed once you inflict the bleed. In an ideal world, we will want only Twister to inflict the bleeds. So we have a really cool way to stop these other skills from applying bleed. The more obvious one is using Bloodlust on this very skill Spearfield. Bloodlust gives it more damage against bleeding enemies, but it cannot cause bleeding, so it doesn't consume Incision. But we're also using Whirlwind Lance, which is a very big AoE skill, which would essentially eat up all the Incision stacks. Well, there's another way to stop it from inflicting bleed, and that is to use Malady, which basically turns it into a poison skill. You don't really do a lot of poison damage with this, but it's cool that now only Twister can consume these Incision stacks. Keep in mind, you only need Incision up to the point where you have enough bleed chance to inflict bleeding on crit, basically 100% times, which I already have. I have 87% on a normal hit and like 20% more on crit. But there are some bonuses you can also get while using Incision. And of course, we're using Herald of Blood, which is a great way to get rid of big stacks of monsters. I'm also testing this now, Bone Shrapnel. Well, let's start with the required items. There are no required items, but it would be great if you could get yourselves a pair of Bushwhacks, which is the cheapest unique item out there. What this does is it gives you decent move speed and some evasion and dex, but most importantly, it gives you this cool physical damage is pinning modifier. And what pin does now, it got buffed. Not only is the target immobilized, but it also cannot evade and is also light stunned. At the cost of not being able to stun that guy. Well, technically you still can, I'll show you how. Why pin is great is because we're using Combat Frenzy to gain charges, specifically frenzy charges, that we can use with our Whirlwind Lance. So every 4.5 seconds, if we get a pin, we will get one frenzy charge, or maybe even more, because there's a 50% chance to get even more. So from the other items, you can also get Death Rush, which is really not that expensive. It gives you Onslaught, that is the big deal. Also Leech on Fizz damage, which is nice. And Accuracy, because we're Amazon, we scale Accuracy. And probably the most important item, but this is something that you shouldn't stress too much about. You just get a decent one, relatively cheap for starters. A Spear with high Fizz damage and high base crit chance, and potentially even attack speed. Accuracy, that's a bonus. Depending on how good your weapon is in terms of accuracy, you decide what ascendancy point you're going to get. The rest of the gear is just whatever. Fill up your resistances, maybe get some Fizz attack here, get some on the other ring. Use whatever shield you want. You just want a high block chance. You're not looking for much else there. Preferably, you want a full dex shield, a buckler, because you'll move faster with it. And that's it for the items. In terms of jewels, you want something like this, or you can get a red jewel that gives you more bleed chance and scales bleed in some way. So that's also interesting. But you cannot go wrong with emeralds. Let's go over the main skills and all the support gems. So Twister, what's important about Twister is that it blinds. It repeatedly hits enemies that are within it, but the Twister can only hit once only 0.66 seconds, so that's a hard limit. They also pierce every single target. So pierce is the first one that gets applied, so you cannot do chain, you cannot do fork. Just keep that in mind. And now the most important thing about Twister and how it scales is once it enters a whirlwind, you get 2 Twisters, and each deals 80% more damage. And the bigger the whirlwind, the higher the stage of the whirlwind, the more damage it deals and the more Twisters you get. So the Twisters, it can just keep growing if they keep entering more and more whirlwinds. So this gets out of control pretty fast, especially if you can keep them alive with skill duration and just acceleration. So what skill gems we're using? 25% more projectile damage if you use the melee hit. Spearfield is actually a melee hit, even though it's kind of ranged. So we just usually do a basic rotation of Q, right click, left click. That's the basic rotation. Q, right click, left click. So we always have that buff. Deep cuts for more bleed magnitude, less damage with hits. I think this is worth it, because we're scaling enough bleed, but early on deep cuts is just not worth it. You don't do that much bleed damage, you're mostly doing physical damage, so bleed is just there to enable some mechanics. Again, lacerate and acceleration for more speed. Now Whirlwind Lance, we're going with martial tempo, which is more attack speed, just to make the build feel smoother. Salvo, like Unleash, you get, look at how many. You get 4 or 5 all the time, so that's perfect. And Malady up until you stop caring about incision stacks. Once you start caring about incision stacks, you can do whatever you want. I'm putting Lightning Infusion to test if I can get some shocks going, but you're really free to use anything you want. Spearfield, this is a support skill. We already explained Bloodlust with Incision. This more magnitude of bleeding doesn't apply to Twisters, so it's basically a useless thing other than just incision stacks. But what's nice is that we can generate rage since this is a melee skill. Rage is very, very powerful. So this is 30% more attack damage if you can keep it at 30 stacks. Blood Hunt, this is... I initially thought this was like a very bad skill, because it eats up the blood loss. So your Herald does less damage, eats up the bleed, and it doesn't even scale off of the bleed. So I really didn't understand this. But now, once it's high enough level, I think it does enough on bosses that it's worth using, where it can deal like a 20 to 25% of the boss HP, especially if it crits. So overall, I think a Blood Hunt is a very decent skill, but not early. So I wouldn't even bother using it until like level 80. We're just scaling damage with it. As you can see, more damage against the enemies that are on low life. This is a must. Like Execute is a must. Conk effect as well, and close combat as well. So there's just really no way to put anything else here, I would say. At least I didn't see any benefit. I'm using shield charge to just charge through hallways and stuff that are empty. With ingenuity, this is a movement skill technically. Bloodhound's mark. So this is a cool way to still enable stunning on the bosses, even though you cannot deal stuns. Like you cannot do stun buildup the normal way. So this works off of just bleed. The more the boss bleeds, the more stun buildup you get. The explosion stuff doesn't really matter that much to us. It's more about just getting the stun. Okay, Herald. Herald works off of corpses. The enemies that die that had blood loss are gonna explode. The damage isn't like that insanely high, but it gives you the consistency on the packs where once you start killing the pack, like everything just dies one by one. And the base radius is not that big, so we want to increase the radius. It's only 1.5 meters, so we're doing 30% more and 35% more. And now Bone Shrapnel, this is something that I'm testing. Essentially, if this skill kills a pinned enemy, it does an additional explosion, which deals 25% of the pinned target's maximum life is fizz damage. That sounds very, very good, but it's hard to test. It's hard to see the difference easily, but I'll keep you posted on this. And now, Combat Frenzy. Because of the boots, everything we do generates pin, so essentially stuff gets pinned all the time. And it's also a great defensive layer. But this is how we generate frenzy charges. And if we go back to Whirlwind Lance, it consumes a frenzy charge, if possible, to create a whirlwind with one more than its normal maximum number of stages. So this is where this skill becomes a lot better than the other whirlwind skill. Now I've seen quite a few builds use the other skill, but essentially you need to use it 3 times and only then shoot the twisters, usually with salvo. So you would swap these. You would put the salvo in here somewhere, and then that twister would go pretty much crazy across the whole screen, like 20 twisters. But it's slower. Like usually you don't need to use the skill 3 times. With Whirlwind Lance, you usually use the skill once, because you just get more with the salvo and the frenzy charges giving you bigger whirlwinds. It just, overall, I think it's better. It's faster. I don't know why I would use the other skill, but you can. Just experiment, I guess. There are some benefits to it. Since I have a 53 spirit vest, I still have some extra spirit to use, but you should definitely get a companion with like haste aura at least. Haste is really nice. It's 20% or 25% attack speed, 10% move speed. Beautiful. There are companions that are easily a lot better than this. Fizz Aura, there's Conjures Lightning Storm. So when it conjures something and use it with Twisters and Whirlwind Lance, those can pick up the elements. As you can see, Elemental Twisters gain 50% of damage as damage of the corresponding type. So if they go over Shock Ground, they also shock and deal lightning damage. That's clearly a bonus to this build, so why not? What's nice about shock is that it affects the bleed magnitude. So if you can incorporate shock into this build, do that. Of course, for companions, you need Meat Shield to keep them alive as long as possible. And you need Last Gasp to keep them alive as long as possible. These things die in like 2 seconds. On a boss, they just get one shot all the time. But this will keep them, well, they give you like 70% uptime on the pet instead of 5. Now on the passive tree, it really depends on what level you're at. Early on, you want to be scaling attack damage. So we're looking at nodes like this, nodes like this. You want to go down to the spear stuff. Really good. Defensively, this node is phenomenal. It increases your block chance by a ton. The downside is basically negligible. You should also get a little bit of move speed if you can, skill speed. In terms of bleed, this is easily the best one. It gives you higher crit chance against bleeding enemies. It gives you 20% chance to aggravate bleeding, which is double damage, basically, for your bleed. So this is when you crit with attacks, and you do quite a bit of attacks because of all the twisters and the whirlwinds. You do a lot of attacks, so you have a very high chance to aggravate bleeding with just this, with only 20% chance. Of course, anything that has to do with damaging ailments, you take it automatically. More hit, more duration. Duration is very rare, so duration is great. This is a secret node, which gives you 10 billion damage. If you have like 60% block, which is easily achievable, you get 60% more damage. Pretty good. Not more. Increased damage. But that's still good. Now, if you're nearing like level 75, you should probably come here and pick up the bleeding on hit and the chance to inflict ailments. That's very important for the consistency of the build because you're focusing on crit. Crit is how you make this build from like solid to extremely good with infinite ceiling, because all you need to kill a boss is one big critical strike that also guarantees a bleed, and then you aggravate that bleed. You literally don't have to hit the boss anymore at all, especially if you have good duration on it. So the whole concept of this build is I'm gonna hit the boss as hard as I can with critical strikes, then inflict bleed, and then I'm gonna aggravate the bleed, and there's nothing else I need to do. The boss will just go, disappears. And you see it in the clips at the start as well. If I get a good bleed, the fight is over. And that was before I even had this setup, which is a lot better. Because if you take a look at some of the stats, look, my resistances are pretty bad. I only have 1.8k life. And I rarely die still, because stuff dies before me, and that's how you should approach Path of Exile in general. Take a look at Twister, for example. Just to show you my gear, the spear is like, it's okay. It costed maybe 10x max. It's like fine. There's nothing else that I have that is any like decent. So, crit chance, 19% on the main hand. And then from accuracy, I'll show the ascendancy in a sec. From accuracy, depending on, I guess, how far away you are from the target, so this is like max distance and this is close range, you get a lot more crit chance. So in my case, if I'm standing on melee range, I have 67%. That's pretty decent, but you want to get to 100. I really think you want to get to 100, or very close to it at least. And also you want to scale the critical damage bonus, because this is basically your whole damage on a boss. The crit damage bonus. This tells you how big your bleed is going to be. Yeah, for the ascendancy, I would say while leveling, this critical strike node isn't that important early. I would rather take this because the bosses are usually the problematic things in Axe. So get this reveal weakness. It's essentially 24% more damage on average against the boss. So you just do more damage against the boss. That's it. Pretty boring. But this chance to hit with attacks can exceed 100%, and then you get crit chance equal to 25% of excess chance to hit with attacks. So this is what makes Amazon one of the best scalers in the game, because it can scale off of a useless stat like accuracy. So we're talking dex, we're talking accuracy, and if we take a look at this one, accuracy on the weapon gives you more fizz damage on the weapon. Fizz damage on the weapon is the base damage that you do, so you scale everything with this. And if you get a very high accuracy weapon, it literally doesn't matter that this thing doesn't have any fizz damage, because you're going to get so much flat damage with the accuracy. So 400 accuracy would be 100 more damage, I guess bottom and top damage. So This is really, really, really strong. And the last node that you should get, I'm thinking you can really get anything. You could even get Stalking Panther if you want to try playing with a body armor that is pure armor. Not necessarily the greatest choice. This is a safe choice. On bosses, you get more move speed and skill speed in certain windows. So overall, Huntress looks really good, and the scaling is just off the charts. It might be one of the best characters that you can make right now. With a build like this, you can play it from essentially level 1, but I would still say if you want to keep it safe, play Rake with Stomping Ground up until the end of like Act 3, and that's where it starts dropping off anyway. And then you switch to this build. As soon as you can get Whirlwind Lance, and potentially even before that, just Whirlwind and Slash. So yeah, guys, that's it for this build. This is how you go. So Q, right click, left click. For me, Spear Field, Whirlwind, Twister. And again, with Frenzy charges, you just get a lot more going. The whole screen is full of Whirlwinds, and the enemies just die. Hope you enjoyed this one. The link, the full written guide is in the description. I'll see you in the next one.